you're going to do this week, don't do it by yourself. Okay? Find some brothers and sisters that will team with you. Second thing it says here in verse 6. But when they opposed him and blasphemed him, he shook his garments and said to them, your blood be on your own heads. I am clean. From now on I will go to the Gentiles. And he departed from there. So the second thing here, the first thing is you've got to get some other believers. You've got to team together. Don't be a lone ranger. And the second thing is be ready to react to the circumstances that come your way. Be ready to react to the circumstances that come your way. So he goes to the synagogue, right? And what happens now? They start to oppose him. As a matter of fact, they say, out of here, right? We don't want your message. They started blaspheming. And so here's the first thing you have to react to. You have to react to closed doors. You know, God is preparing people to hear the gospel. But some doors you go to, they might be closed, right? So here's my first advice for you in being ready to react. Don't try to go through closed doors, right? You can hurt yourself that way, right? Don't try to go through closed doors. So he said, okay, fine. If you don't want the gospel, and he takes his coat off and he shakes the dust out. He was kind of doing what Jesus said. Jesus said, if people reject your message, then take your shoes, shake the dust off your shoes. He was shaking it off his coat. And basically he was saying, okay, right now, apparently this door is not open. So if for some reason, you reject Christ, you continue to reject Christ, your blood is on your own head. I'm not looking for the closed door. I'm not going to go through a closed door. So be ready to react to a closed door by not going through it. So he stops going to the synagogue, he leaves, and what happens next? In verse 7, it says, and he departed from there and entered the house of a certain man named Justus. And entered the house of a certain man named Justus, one who worshiped God, whose house was next door to the synagogue. Okay, so he leaves the synagogue. Does anybody have you? Let's see. Look what it says there. Whose house was joined hard to the synagogue. His house was San Francisco style, right? There's no space. He had his house, this house for Justus was right up against the synagogue. So he leaves one door, right? And he goes in the next door. Is that crazy? Right there, God had prepared someone who was ready to accept him in. This guy, Justus, in other places he's called Gaius. He ended up being one of the main helpers of Paul. But it was right there. So isn't that crazy? He let the one door go, but when he saw an opportunity. So the second thing about being ready to respond is when you see an open door, go through it. He goes through that door. And now all these people going to the synagogue, what are they seeing? Yeah, they're seeing him and they're seeing Paul right there. Hey guys, you going in there? How about in here? They started to get, God set it up so they were right by the synagogue, right? And here's what happens. So now we got Justus, right? That's number 6. It says, then in verse 8, Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord. Okay, that makes 7, right? If my adding is right, maybe more. The leader of the synagogue, he's been leading the synagogue, and he sees that he's kicked out. He goes, wait a minute, I want what he's got. And so the leader of the synagogue believes on the Lord and all his household. Okay, now we've got his household. We've got Aquila and Priscilla. We've got Timothy and Silas. We've got Justus, and now we've got Crispus, and now we've got all his household. And many of the Corinthians hearing believed and were baptized. Now many of the Corinthians, we've got a movement going on here. All because he decided 2 things so far. Well, he'd already decided it. You know what? I'm going to live by faith, which means I'm going to Corinth. And I'm going to find like-minded people. And then number 2, when I see a closed door, I'm not going to go in it. When I see an open door that God's opened, I'm going to step in it. I'm going to have to step out and do something. I'm going to have to believe God is going to do something. And all of a sudden, we've got a movement going here. We have to look at our own situation too. In our lives, there are places that doors are shut, that we can't go in sometimes, right? And there are other doors that are open. And we might not understand what God is doing, but God is doing something. And we're saying, okay, if there's an open door, maybe God is doing something, and we better listen. We better go through the open door. I don't know why that's closed off and this is open, but things like that happen. God has a plan. I look at our congregation and say, in the last, 8-10 months, we've added a couple pastors that are studying in the congregation among us. Not to mention the Spanish pastor. We've got 4 of us. I don't know what God's doing, but we better be ready for something because He might be opening some kind of door for us. Was it just a coincidence that we have a Filipino pastor one morning, and that night a couple come that are from the same village that he's from? I don't know what God's doing, but there might be some kind of door. And you know what we better say? If God opens the door, we better walk through it, right? If God opens the door, we better walk through it. Okay, so we've talked about 2 things so far. We've talked about like-minded people, if you're going to step out in faith. And we've talked about looking for opportunities when doors close and when doors open. But if we go on, it says in verse 9, now the Lord spoke to Paul. You guys have those hardback King James Bibles there? Pick them up. And I want you to open to page 1723. So if you got one of those Bibles, open to 1723. Okay? You're looking at 1723, right? How many people got it? Okay, a few people got it. Still looking. Okay, as you look at 1723, look at that page. Does anything jump out at you? What jumps out at you? There's red in the middle of that. There's red in the middle of that page? Wait a minute. Are you sure? Because that means Jesus' words, right? And Jesus was back in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's when He spoke. Right? But there's red in the middle of that page? Are you trying to tell me that even after Jesus went up to heaven, He still speaks to people? Whoa. So red in the middle, I guess if there's red in there, we better see what the red says. Okay, it doesn't mean that you've read it. It means that you need to read it if it's red. So here it says, the Lord spoke to Paul in a night vision. Now, remember, they didn't have the Bible like we did. Paul was writing the Bible at the time, right? He was one of the authors of the Bible through the Holy Spirit. They didn't have the Bible, so we can go to the Bible to listen to God, but also when you pray, praying just isn't just talking, right? It's not telling God everything, right? He probably already knows it. So another part of prayer is listening, okay? God, what do you want to say to me? Listen. See where God is trying to challenge you or speak to you. And so here Paul gets a vision at night. And here's what it says. Now the Lord spoke to Paul in a night vision. Do not be afraid, but speak and do not keep silent, for I am with you, and no one will attack you to hurt you. This sounds just like Jesus, right? He says, don't be afraid. Okay? Do not be afraid. I'm with you. I mean, that's in the Great Commission. I am with you always. You see all kinds of times in the Gospels, Jesus says, don't be afraid. So this sounds like Jesus, and Paul is recognizing Jesus is talking to me here. He may have been ready to quit at that point. You know, it was too much. He was getting discouraged, and all of a sudden he gets a word from the Lord. And the word from Jesus is, don't be afraid. You will be safe. I will take care of you. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, if you're ready to take a risk, to step out there and say, I'm going to believe God and I'm going to try to share my faith with somebody this week, you know what Jesus says? Don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. And the second thing He says is speak up. Go ahead and speak up. Don't be afraid. Speak up. And so I'm going to have you practice something right now. We're about halfway through our sermon, but you still need to practice this, okay? What I want you to practice is 5 words that says, the just shall live by faith. 6 words, the just shall live by faith. I'm going to give you another 6 words, okay? Here are the words. Have you ever heard the gospel? Have you ever heard the gospel? Say it. One more time. Okay, now I want you to say it 3 times to the person next to you. Okay, practice it. Okay. Very good. I heard the emphasis on different words. I'm glad to hear you can say that.